Mini 2, Mini Harder. All this and more on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Sega Commits to Retro Part 2.
There are stranger things than a customized workbench.
And the ultimate scam.
All these stories and a whole lot more coming up on This Week in Retro. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello, chaps. For those of you in the UK, I hope you enjoyed the 4-day weekend that we had with the extra days off for the Jubilee. Did you follow it, Dave?
I took a day off work quite happily, and I built a Windows XP machine rather than watching the Jubilee.
Very nice. And how about you, Chris, as a Australian immigrant from these shores originally?
Other than a couple of photos off Facebook, I haven't seen a thing on it. Partially because I haven't been watching much TV, so it's probably my own fault, but seriously haven't seen much coverage at all, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, there we go.
Wonderful. And likewise here. So we'll quickly move on to the next topic. I've been chatting this week to Doug over at the 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. I'm sure you guys know of his channel. And it's that time again where he's holding his retro art contest, his Amiga art contest, which is a really nice thing. He started it in 2019. There's a link in the show notes to the announcement and all the details you need. If you're creative and you want to submit a photo, an animation, anything artistic, really, get those creative juices flowing and take part in this competition. And I really like this idea because, Doug is, he's a one-man army in trying to prove to everyone that the Amiga is more than just a games machine, which of course it is, but, sorry, Chris is looking confused there. What
are the joysticks for then?
And also, I think when you try to do anything with retro machines, whether it's coding, whether it's art, anything at all whatsoever, it's really difficult to sit down and focus unless you've got a purpose. And to be given a purpose like a competition, it really does motivate you and give you an end goal. So it's great that people like Doug are running competitions like this. So I would encourage people to get behind it and support it and indeed take part if you have some or even little skill. You don't need a lot of skill to take part. Just get involved. So that's excited me this week. How about you, Chris?
Nice. Well, I have to add there, I have in fact entered Doug's art competition in the past just to prove how little skill I actually have in D-Paint. But it was good fun. Like you say, it gives you focus, and I just used the opportunity to recreate an image I remember drawing in D-Paint back in the day. So I had fun, even though it was a terrible image. I actually had a mate up yesterday that I've been wanting to catch up with for a long time, showing him my retro collection, and we ended up sitting down and playing GoldenEye. I just think there's a game for everyone, and we're sort of finding that common ground because obviously we got different paths in terms of gaming. As soon as he saw the N64, it was GoldenEye. He did choose Odd Job, and yes, he is still a friend, even though he chose Odd Job. Mm-hmm. But I'd given him what I thought was the good controller, so it's one of those brand new recreation controllers, and I used the dodgy original one. I thrashed him every round, and then afterwards I realised it's because actually the brand new controller, it's almost digital. It's almost all or nothing. When you try and control with the thumbstick, it just flies from one side of the screen to the other once it actually connects. So not the best controller, I have to say. So I'll have to get some reconditioned ones, I think. But yeah, good fun. Good fun. Dave?
So it turns out that Sega watched episode 77 of This Week in Retro. And this isn't a story we've picked this week to go into great detail, but on episode 77, we asked for Sega to do a nice Warhammer 40k FPS, and Sega watched the episode and agreed, and are now producing a game called Bolt Gun, which looks to be based in the Unreal Engine. At least it looks like that to me, but it looks very much like a Doom or Duke style FPS. It's only a teaser, and there's only just a few seconds of gameplay, and there's really not much to say yet, but clearly this podcast is in control of the gaming industry.
Clearly. Yeah, this was off the back of Sega announcing that they were going to fully commit back to retro, and they were going to dive into old IPs and things like that. And I think we made the suggestion that Warhammer and was it Space Hulk, that's been a game in the past, and things like that should be resurrected. So there you go. Clearly, they in the space of 2 weeks, they've knocked that up off the back of our podcast. And, give it another 2 weeks, they'll probably have finished it. But they'll be hanging on to our every word today to hear if they need to change anything. So with that in mind, let's go straight into our first story, shall we? And our first story does continue the Sega theme today. A lot of Sega news lately. Following that recent story about Sega making a fresh commitment to retro, we've got another bit of news to discuss. The announcement of a new mini console from the company. We're back into mini territory again. It has been 0 days since we last discussed mini consoles. There were rumors that an announcement was imminent, and it was causing a lot of excitement on social media. I saw a lot of buzz everywhere about this. Lots of people saying it's going to be the Dreamcast Mini at last. Some people hoping for the Saturn Mini. But no, unfortunately, neither of those. What we've got from Sega is the Sega Mega Drive 2 Mini. Can I get a woo? Bit of excitement, guys?
Sega.
I know your memory isn't failing you. We had seen a Sega Mega Drive Mini in 2019. And 3 years later, here we are getting the Mega Drive 2. With those of you with long memories, just to put this in some context, the original Mega Drive came out in 1988 in Japan, and the Mega Drive 2 came 5 years later. So they haven't hung on 5 years, just the 3 years from the 1 and the 2 in the Mini here. Now, the full-fat Mega Drive 2 was, of course, compatible with the original Mega Drive. It was a cost-reduced model. And I have to say, for me, the original Mega Drive has always been the more desirable model for me, mostly just because of its looks. I love the way it looked. Whether it's the release we got or the Japanese version, which looks slightly different, I just think it's a gorgeous-looking console, especially when you pair it up with the Mega CD 1, which is the one that sits underneath it. When you come onto the 2, you have the Mega CD that sits side by side. To me, it looks cost reduced. I don't know. Maybe it's just down to personal taste. So the Mega Drive Mini 2 isn't yet confirmed for a Western release, so we don't know if we're going to get it over here. What we do know is that it will have 50 games included, spanning both cartridge and CD releases, and it's going to cost roughly £60. So guys, it's mini time again. What do you make of this from Sega?
So this is my first mini story on This Week in Retro, so if I manage to do a joystick story, I'll have completed my initiation. I'm not a console person. I've never owned a console. The first console I owned was 2 years ago when I bought a GX 4000. So I don't know a great deal about them, but to me that just looks like a Mega Drive. So that's exactly what it looks like. It does the job there. The emulator, and you get 2 controllers and a whole load of games for 60 quid seems like a really low amount of money. It's an impulse purchase, so it's the kind of thing you'll see it on Amazon and go, oh, I'll stick that in my box, or you'll buy it for someone for a present. So it's a great price. And personally, as far as minis are concerned, I don't like the comparison between these kinds of things and emulations with a Pi, etc. I know people say, well, you can do all that with a Pi, or you can do all that, you don't need to buy it. I don't agree with that at all. If you were a console fan back in the day rather than a computer fan, you were probably illiterate. So the idea of someone coming out and managing to get an emulator, that's not a serious point. No, but if you were a console fan back in the day, there's nothing there to say that you would be able to research and find out what an emulator is, get it, find the ROMs, put it all together. Whereas you can just buy this, plug it in and play, and to me that looks ideal.
Well, I feel like I need to issue an apology on behalf of Dave at this point. Sorry, all console owners.
Don't worry, they won't write in. They can't.
Just digging deeper. He's just digging a deeper hole.
No, that's true, though. They don't have keyboards, so how are they going to do it?
Crayons.
Let's move on swiftly. £60 you describe as an impulse purchase. And I agree with you, but at what point does that momentum stop when you've bought the Mega Drive Mini 1, the Mega Drive Mini 2? When does the impulse stop? When do all the £60 add up and you go, actually, I'm spending a bit too much on this. I should just get a Pi and have everything in one place. I don't know, but I agree with you. It's like the same argument we had about the Amiga Mini. Yeah, you could just set up an Amiga Mini on a Pi, but it's lovely to have that nicely finished case and that packaging and the mouse and not so much the joypad that came with that, but the whole experience is a nice thing, and I think it's well worth the money. Is it a good start to Sega's recent promise to embrace its heritage and retro, as it said it would, over the next 5 years? That's another question, I think. I think we will see the Saturn and the Dreamcast Minis come eventually, and I think it will be all part and parcel of this completionist attitude of having to buy all of the minis to get the collection, to complete the set, to have them all lined up on your shelf. But I think we'll probably see, my guess and my money would be on a Master System Mini next. I think that's just the quick win, the easy option. If you can do a Mega Drive Mini, surely they can very easily and quickly knock out a Master System Mini before they get onto the complexities of the Saturn and the extra power needed for the Dreamcast and all of that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that next. But yeah, the Mega Drive Mini 2 will certainly be a good test of Sega Mini owner loyalty. If a large portion of those who bought the first Mega Drive Mini also buy the second, then Sega are just going to go all guns blazing. They're not going to look back. They're going to say, right, here is a group of people that we can absolutely rinse because we've proven they've effectively bought the same thing twice. They're going to buy it 3, 4, 5 times. So let's just keep wringing that out. Is that fair to say, Chris?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I love the whole Mini idea, and I haven't got many of them. In fact, I've only got the A500 Mini, to be honest. But something like the Mega Drive, I have some nostalgia towards it because one of my friends had one, but I never had one. So I'm not going to go out and buy a real Mega Drive and start collecting games for it. It just doesn't make any sense for me. And this is where Minis come in, and they just do that job perfectly. And this price is a fantastic price. I'd certainly be tempted to pick one up. I miss the original Mega Drive Mini, and I do prefer the aesthetics of the original Mega Drive. So I'm a bit gutted because even these minis, they kind of almost instantly become collectible. They get hoarded by a few people, and then they get resold at higher than the original value once the original shipment has dried up. The one I'm really gutted about that I didn't pick up was the SNES, because I did have a SNES back in the day. But again, I'm really not tempted to pick up an actual one and start collecting games. I'd rather just have the Mini, because the Mini actually has most of the games I would want anyway. So yeah,
I used a Mini in an internet cafe some years back, and it was great pick up and play experience. Perfect for that kind of setting. An internet cafe, just your lounge when friends come over. That's what these minis are all about. Just pick up and play with none of this. Oh, there's a update that you need to install, or something's changed. It's just pick up and play and reliable, and I love that about them.
I think they should put a thing in, I've just thought of this, whereby every now and again it will fail to load the game, and you have to pull out a pretend cartridge and blow in the slot and then put it back, and then it will magically load. That would be epic.
In slightly unrelated Mega Drive news this week, I actually scored a real in the wild Mega Drive game cartridge. It was only Sonic the Hedgehog, nothing rare or too exciting, but there it was, a Sonic the Hedgehog game in its box on the shelf in a charity shop this week.
Oh,
I mean, I haven't seen a Mega Drive or any cartridge game for that matter for, I don't know, 15, 20 years in a charity shop. So I had to buy it. It was £8.50, which I think it's cheaper if I went to the retro game shop in Swindon and bought that. But you can pick up Sonic for a £5, surely. But just to say I'd done it, just to reset the clock and say the last time I bought a cartridge game in the wild was 2022. I thought that was £8.50 well spent. So there you go. I picked that up. Who knows when I'll next see a cartridge game in the wild. But speaking of games, with this Mega Drive Mini 2, it's promising 50 games. Obviously, these games are catered to the Japanese audience where it's being launched. So if we do get a Western launch, they may well change. And we haven't got the full list of games, but they do include, apparently, Bonanza Brothers, Fantasy Zone, Mansion of Hidden Souls. I'm not familiar with that one. Has anyone played that one? Mansion of Hidden Souls, no. Shining Force CD, so we've got some CD games represented. Shining in the Darkness, Slipheed, Sonic CD, that's a great addition. Thunder Force 4, and Virtua Racing, which would have contained that extra chip magic to eke out the 3D in it. So, that's all we know so far. There'll be, many, many more games. How many games could you get for 60 quid for the Mega Drive? I mean, you could probably get 15 or 20 average, very common games, 8 to 10 less average, desirable games. I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable value. I mean, they're drip feeding out the games on it. They'll release a few names every so often to keep interest going. But by the time 50 classic games for the Mega Drive are there, I mean, if you write a list of the best Mega Drive games, do you get to 50?
That's true. Yeah. So you're looking at, let's put this in some perspective though. 50 games for £60, £1.20 per game. I mean,
Yeah.
this is lower than the Codemasters and the Mastertronic prices of cassette games in the 80s. That's pretty damn good value for money, I think. So I don't think there can be too many complaints. And I think that is the bottom line. 50 games for £60, £1.20 a game. It's hard to complain.
Isn't that the cost of what a modern game is now? About 60 quid.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're going, AAA game in this day and age, for sure. So yeah, I think it represents pretty good value for money. And in the presentation, they're showing little add-ons like the Mega CD unit to sit next to it, and I think there was a Virtua Racing cartridge that sat on the top of it. No doubt there'll be a 32X thing to, it's that blurring the lines between model collecting and retro gaming, and people like that. And I'm not going to complain for £60. I'm fine with that. So until the next Mini is announced, and let's place our bets just before we end this story. For me, it's the Master System. What do you think?
The next one that will be announced.
The next one that
by
will be
Sega
announced.
Or by anyone?
Let's go by anyone then. Go by anyone.
I think there'll be another SNES.
Another SNES?
Oh, I hope there'd be another SNES. I really do. I think there will be a mini Jaguar just to really annoy me because I've just shelled out for a real one.
Well, watch this space. I'm sure it'll only be a matter of weeks before we're talking about them again.
Johnny is a mini Jaguar.
Okay, guys, right. I want you to think back to your days with for you, Neil, your Amiga, and Dave, your whatever that machine was you had, the ST or whatever it was. And if you like, your first version of Windows, did you customize the look and feel of the operating system? As in, the colors, the background, the icons, even just once? Did you have a play?
Certainly did it in Windows 3 and onwards. Changed the sounds. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that from Space Odyssey. I don't remember doing it in the ST, but I do remember adding little programs. I think it was a rat trap it was caused to stop the menus opening by accident. So I did a little bit of it, yeah.
Neil?
Yeah, I mean, Windows in particular, my method was always to just set the desktop to black, nothing but black. I had a super organized start menu with everything filed within its subfolders. Active desktop always had to be off. And I was laughing recently because a visitor who came to the cave and used the Windows 98 machine, for some reason, turned on active desktop. I was like,
did you show them out?
I don't know why they did that. I think they were just trolling me. I kept the desktop clean and clear, and everything was super, super organized. And that was from the point of view of productivity, knowing where to find stuff and minimizing the amount of memory that was actually used by crap, so that I had it available for programs. Yeah.
Nice.
Why are we talking about this, Chris?
Well, I mean, I for one, I certainly did tinker, even back in the days of the Amiga, just because you could. I didn't always save it unless it was my copy of Workbench, obviously. But I tended to go towards the black background with white borders and white text and a splattering of red, because red on black just looks angry and awesome. And so, yeah, definitely did that back in the day. The reason I'm bringing this up, to answer your question, is because, well, the internet kind of exploded recently. Actually, that's not true. It was just sort of a mild eruption on a couple of Facebook groups. But the reason was there is an Amiga 1000 in Stranger Things Season 4. Now, obviously, we've talked about machines in TV series and movies and all that kind of stuff previously several times, so we don't need to hark on about it too much. But basically, just to set the scene, Season 4 of Stranger Things is set in 1986, and there's a teenage hacker called Susie, played by Gabriella Grace Pizzolo, and she uses her Amiga 1000 to assist the main characters in their quest. No spoilers here, other than the fact that there's an Amiga 1000. And so the A1000, it shows up as early as episode 1, in fact, and it's sort of really key scene is in episode 5, where Susie is called upon to dial into a government computer to reveal the location of a secret base. Okay, so that's a slight spoiler. Sorry about that. But you know what it's like. The know-it-alls on the internet were very quick to point out what was wrong with the scene, but I really want to take this opportunity to celebrate what they got right. Okay, so first of all, the show's set in 1986. So they haven't gone with an Amiga 500, which is the more recognizable. They've gone with the A1000, which was released in 1985. So the machine is right for the period. And they're actually showing Workbench on the screen. albeit it's clearly a bit customized. It's green on black, hence my question. The icon actually says copy of Workbench. So they've even a shout back to the fact that you were meant to make a copy of Workbench rather than the actual disk. And there is a slight error there, though, because it's Workbench 1.3, and that wasn't out until 1988. But anyway, moving on.
Oh, shocking.
Yep. I know, it's terrible,
outraged.
isn't it?
I'm never watching this show again.
Ruined.
Stranger Things sucks. So the monitor, it's got the right monitor. They haven't just paired it with some random monitor. It's a 1080. It's got the tank mouse. May not actually be plugged in, but again, we'll forgive it that. They've got the right mouse. It's not on a mouse pad. Anyway, and it's actually the correct keyboard. It's a Amiga 1000 keyboard, which is fantastic. Very distinct keyboard because of the positioning of the arrow keys on the Amiga 1000. Look, I just love the fact that it's there. I love the fact that not only is it there, but it's displaying Workbench and not some made-up BS OS 6.9 with big, red access denied boxes flashing all over the screen, which is what they usually do. So Neil, I don't know. I'm making an assumption here. Are you not into Stranger Things? I'm guessing that you're not the kind. This isn't the kind of show that you'd be into.
Why are we making this assumption? Why?
I don't know. I just assumed it wouldn't be your thing. Maybe because it sort of leans towards the horror kind of genre. Are you into it?
Yes, I've watched it from the start. I love this show.
Cool, we've got more to talk about than I thought. Yeah.
What kind of judgment is this on you, Neil?
I know, shocking. Invite him onto the show to be a co-host. And
that's terrible, isn't it?
Gets brave, starts slating me, honestly.
All right, so
sledging, that's what they call in the cricket, isn't it? He's sledging me.
I just assumed that you weren't into the show. But anyway, so yeah, feel free to give me your short thoughts on the show. But also, did you customize Workbench was the main question I had for you, Neil.
Well, you have to remember this conversation we had some time back when you were first on the show, which is I never remember anything about the shows I watch. The names of the characters, yes. I always get told off by Lily for calling 11-7. And just
is it 11?
So yeah, but I'm into the show. I love the aesthetic of it. I just love everything about it. And although Series 4 is really going hard on the horror, I'm fine. I think it's a lot more graphic than the previous series, or it just gets graphic sooner and hits you hard from the start. So yeah, but I'll try not to give any spoilers. But yes, I am enjoying it. Workbench, just coming back to customization, because I spoke about customizing Windows, but on Workbench, I didn't really customize it, to be honest, because 90% of what I did on an Amiga just went straight into the program. You didn't always see Workbench. I had a pretty stock Amiga, so I was always loading Workbench off of the disk, which was invariably write protected. So any changes I made weren't going to be written back to disk. And again, like when I mentioned on the Windows PC, it was all about memory. It was all about protecting that precious memory and not using up too much memory, because you wanted it for the program, or on the Amiga, you wanted it for that really cool thing, which was the RAM disk. So you could shove programs into the RAM disk and make them run really quickly. I always enjoyed that. I thought that was really futuristic for some reason. I do remember using an icon editor on Workbench to draw icons pixel by pixel. Did you ever use that? And it would... Yeah, I think it would have the screen, wouldn't it? And you would have a zoomed view.
That's right.
And I think, yeah. And you could. I don't know if I'm confusing that with Deluxe Paint or if that was it. It would zoom in and you could click pixel by pixel. And that's probably the point I realized I would never be a pixel artist, because every time I tried to draw an icon, it just looked terrible. You draw it, you go, well, that looks good. And then you zoom back out and see it on your Workbench, and it was horrible.
Yeah, no,
so,
I remember doing that.
Yeah, I tried, but I gave up on that pretty quickly.
Yeah, you could customize the icons. You could also customize the mouse pointer. I remember doing that and trying to make it look like a stealth fighter. But then see again, previous conversations, my I don't know what it is, but my wish to have everything standard as well. So yes, I would tinker, and then I would instantly want to set it back to default. So if you're sort of overwritten, I think you could just reset preferences or something on Workbench. But yeah, changing the mouse pointer, thought it looked awesome, and then we'd change it straight back after all those hours of work. But anyway, I mean, the Workbench, it's a very interesting look. The original Workbench, 1.3 is the one that sticks out to me, which is, the white on blue. is that actually the best contrast-wise? Contrast is something I'm really into because of, again, my time. I've mentioned this before, but messing about with the web content accessibility guidelines. And there's a tool that I used to show people, I used to point people towards, that you can, there's a color contrast analyzer. There used to be a downloadable version, but the one I've been talking about with this week is actually on webaim.org. There's a color contrast checker on there as well that you can just use from within the browser. And the whole idea of that is you basically use the dropper to set your background color and your foreground color, and you test the contrast ratio against the accessibility standards. So the standards, a ratio of around 6.1 is a fail at AAA standard, and a ratio of around 4 to 1, 6 to 1, not 6.1, and a ratio of 4 to 1
Are these
is
horse
a
racing
fail.
odds?
Yes, these are horse racing odds. So 4 to 1, on 4 to 1, we have AA standard. That would be a good name for a horse. That'd be a great name for a horse, AA standard. I like it. Anyway, so for a ratio of 4 to 1, around 4 to 1 is basically a complete fail. So I was using the color checker against these versions of Workbench. My reason being, I wanted to see how is this customized version of Workbench that they showed in Stranger Things, is it actually better than the original Workbench?
Oh, okay.
So the original Workbench colors, white on blue, that is in fact a pass, which surprised me. It's a pass of around 7.37 to 1. So it's not bad, but only just passes.
I'll take those odds.
Yep. Stranger Thing colors, so the green on black, that's a pass of between 7.88 to 1 to around 9.03 to 1. Now, the reason I've given that range is obviously I'm going by a screenshot from a TV show. So it really depends on where you click to select your foreground and background colors. I was trying to be as honest as possible. So let's call it an 8. It's around an 8 to 1. So it's actually fairly close to the original colors for contrast. Workbench 3, so I don't know how much you remember about Workbench. Obviously, that's when they went grey. In fact, I think Workbench 2, they originally went grey, didn't they? But I was messing about with the Workbench 3 colours. So that's kind of a black on grey. That's actually a really good pass of 9.03 to 1. Mm-hmm. My preferred colours that I'm messing about with at the moment on my actual A500 and in emulation, so that's white on black. Well, funnily enough, that's the highest contrast you can get. So that's 21 to 1 as a contrast ratio. So yeah, there you go. It's actually not a
odds on favourite, 21 to 1, white on black. Now it's interesting you raise this because I'm pretty sure some time ago I read it might have been in one of these history of Commodore books or something like that. I'm sure I read that the original color choices for Workbench were chosen because they were the most effective color choices on the worst possible monitor. So they took the worst case scenario, the worst television, maybe even a monochrome, black and white television that someone might have been plugging their Amiga into, and they found that it was it was like the blue and the white text on blue with orange, wasn't it? That combo gave the best results on the cheapest, crappiest monitor. So someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read that's why it is. So interesting, though, those results, because you would think the 21 to 1 white on black would still be better even on that monitor. I don't know.
Maybe it depends on the limitations of the screen itself. If you think about connecting, Amigas were predominantly connected by RF, weren't they?
Yeah.
So if you think about RF, you don't get black. If you have black and RF, you get a kind of a halo around it of different colours. So perhaps that's what it is.
Well, I think it depends what Amiga you're talking about, because I'm sure there would have been a lot more RF Amiga 500 users than there would have been 1,000. If you could afford an Amiga 1000, you were probably chucking a monitor on top of it.
That's true.
That would be
you're using composite, wouldn't you?
Well, you got RGB out, haven't you?
Yeah,
so
you got RGB. Yeah, you got RGB. Yeah. So the rich kids had monitors, but people like me and
me
and maybe Neil, it was into a TV. It was into a TV via the RF.
And the Amiga 1000 was not a cheap machine at all. So if you were going to pony up the money for that, then perhaps you would almost certainly have, especially for what it was. I mean, it was amazing for multimedia. So it'd be it'd be a bit of a disaster to couple it with a monitor that really didn't show it off.
Yeah, I really like these color contrast analyzers, and I'll put the links to the two in the show notes for Duncan. But One of them, it actually shows what the colors would look like to certain different degrees of color blindness. And where that comes into play for everybody is exactly this scenario. What if you're using a rubbish monitor, or the colors aren't set right, or you're using a monochrome display? Because funnily enough, you get exactly the same kind of thing happen. Whereas if the contrast isn't great, things actually disappear when you go monochrome rather than being visible, unless you've got that contrast ratio. So it's actually a really important design aspect to keep in mind. So yeah, it's really cool. But anyway, that's enough about customized version of Workbench. Another huge feature all the way through Stranger Things, and sort of integral to the storyline almost, is, role playing, and specifically Dungeons and Dragons. And Dave, I know you like your role playing. So have you spotted things in the franchise on that front? Do they mostly get that right?
Yeah, they do. I don't know about every monster or every game they mention in it, but it strikes me that they got the feeling of D&D bang on, at least for how it was back then, because I think Stranger Things started in the early 80s, maybe 1983 did it start, and presumably it's gone year by year since then. That seems to ring a bell. D&D was very different back then. It was really quite homebrew in the early 80s. It was mostly homemade adventures and homemade monsters, and you maybe didn't have all the source books, and that's the feeling I get from Stranger Things. It's that kind of free form D&D that you had back then. Nothing like as official as it got by TSR and then Wizards of the Coast in the 90s. So I'm fairly sure, though, that someone who was perhaps in the late teens and played D&Ds in the early 80s, clearly I'm much too young for that, would be able to write a list of things that aren't quite right. But I don't think it matters. I think that's the whole appeal of the show. It's a little bit better than the reality, not in the Red Dwarf sense, but a bit better than the reality of our memories of it. It's an enhanced version of it.
Yeah, that's so true. What I love is what they've done with D&D. I don't know that much about D&D because I wasn't allowed to play it. And in the storyline, they've even picked up on that. There was a paranoia amongst certain people that D&D was something evil. It was going to corrupt your kids. It was going to lead them down a dark path. And that is in the show. And I remember that being in the news and perpetuating through certain circles. So it's really interesting that they picked up on that. Yes, okay, going back to the computer, they've got plenty wrong. Actually, that's not the right phrase. They have used artistic license in much of the scene.
I think that's the better way to put it.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. They're talking about the internet to a degree. They're hacking HTML code, which is quite amusing to see that flashing up on an Amiga 1000. And they do kind of explain that away in the script in a cheeky way. They know it doesn't fit, and they sort of shine a light on it almost.
Trolling us.
I think they are trolling us. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's one item in a scene in a massive franchise about a period in the past we all love being transported back to. And think about it. Everything in every scene has to at least try and be period correct. So, the carpet, the walls, the posters, the desks, the chairs, the cars, the cutlery, things in the kitchen, the kind of TVs and radios that are maybe visible as the camera pans around, the phone plugged into the wall, the type of BMXs they're riding, the type of cars on the street, even in the background. Dragons.
They plug the phone into the wall, Chris, do they? But they don't plug the tank mouse into the Amiga.
No. But yeah, all the pop culture references, the list goes on. But I just think,
maybe they did the Kickstarter for the wireless tank mouse. Maybe that's what they did.
Maybe that's what it was. They had the prototype.
Yes, they did. Yeah, and it connected to the internet wirelessly as well. It's fantastic. This machine could time travel. But anyway, you know what I'm getting. There's a lot of work and effort goes into it. And it's easy to make ourselves feel big by pointing out that it's Workbench 1.3, a couple of years too early. But it's one tiny icon in an entire world that's been recreated from the ground up, and I just absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think that's what dragged me into it. You did mention earlier that I'm not so much into the horror films, but just the aesthetic of the whole thing. From the first time you saw an early 80s bedroom on that show, and the posters and the, coupled with the lovely lighting and, again, artistic licensing. We didn't fill our bedrooms with RGB lighting back in the 80s. There's lots of that going on, but it gets the feeling across, and I really love it. And I noticed this week Stranger Things has just put Kate Bush into the top 10 here in the music charts. There's a whole
heard
new
that.
generation just discovered Running Up That Hill, and they put her into the top 10. And likewise, they're going to be discovering a whole load of other stuff that we don't notice. So retro gaming, retro toys, fashion, posters, memorabilia, all of that stuff. They're going to be seeing it through that show. They're going to be looking it up and getting into it. And remember, it's so easy to do that now. If we watched a show back in the early 90s and thought, wow, that poster looks great, or I wish I had those shoes, or whatever, we couldn't just go on the internet and look it up. There had to be a huge campaign in magazines really pushing it, tied in with the program for us to get it. But there they go. Kate Bush had no intention to re-release a single or an album. They can just go on Spotify and play it now, and bang, it's in the top 10, which is really wonderful to see. Yeah, I love it. Even though it's through rose-tinted glasses sometimes, I do love the world of Stranger Things.
Nice. Yeah, they've just put the price of A1000s up then. That's all I'm getting from that. But yeah, every episode, I think it just paints an amazing picture of life in the 80s. It sometimes paints it with a broad brushstroke that smudges the edges a little, I think is the best way to put it. Mm-hmm. But I just want to say thank you to everybody involved in the making of Stranger Things. Seriously, you do a wonderful job.
So submitted by show favourite Control-Alt-Reese, who isn't quite up there with Pajako, but he still submits quite a lot to us. He submitted a story that there has been some early Ultimas. Yeah, shockwaves.
The internet. This is a big one.
Yeah, that's the Kotaku headline. Wata graded extremely rare early Ultima turns out to be a forgery. So, on the 30th of May, on Twitter, Dominus of Exalt sent a tweet that said, "This used to be the centerpiece of my collection, rare and expensive old games. Now it turns out I've been scammed and sold forgeries by a well-known figure in the Ultimate and retro games community, along with many others." Dominus of Exalt is a big Ultima fan. He's also known as Dominus Dragon in the Ultima fandom. He's actually one of the people behind the Exalt project, which I know you played, Neil, which is it's the modern engine to play the data files from Ultima 7 and so on. Loads of people have seen it. It's great. Now, in a private Facebook group with over 6,000 members called the Big Box Computer Game Collectors, admin Joel McCoy makes a thorough and detailed post. In it, he explains that someone in the group felt that they had been sold a forgery and reached out to other people in the group. Now, they kept it quiet, so the admins of the group kept it quiet while they investigated, and they found out that beyond any doubt, they had all been sold forgeries by a guy, Enrico Ricciardi, who is the well-known figure mentioned in Dominus's tweet. And he's also a former moderator of that group. Now, what are the actual games that have been forged? Well, it's Ultima. It's not Ultima 1, it's Ultima, because back then there wasn't an Ultima 2, so it's just Ultima. It was the re-release that was called Ultima 1. Akalabeth, Escape from Mount Drash, but also non-Ultima games like Temple of Apshai and an early Sierra game, Mystery House. Now, these games mostly predate the games industry. These are mostly museum pieces. You may have seen me hold up my copy of Ultima 1, but that's nothing like these games. These games are from another level from that. They're way, way super rare games. They're games from before the games industry really existed. So most of them are games in bags. So Richard Garriott would make them, and I'm sure he talked to you about it, Neil, when you interviewed him. They make them up in a bag, seal the bag, and that's how they were distributed. And they weren't kept. They weren't highly valued back then, so there's not that many of them around. Escape from Mount Drash, for example, which is Sierra's Ultima knockoff with his consent, I believe. There's only believed to be about around 15 copies of that in existence at all. So it's all high value stuff. So these are not replicas, Neil. These are fake, intentional fakes, not replicas being misused as fakes. So reading this story and the personal impact it must have on people has got me thinking hard about replicas. For me, the purpose of owning a box game is to experience the game in the best way possible. I always say that for old box games like all the stuff I have behind me and in front of me and around me, the experience starts when you touch the box, when you read the box, when you open it, when you read the manual. There's maybe a novella in there. But somewhere around 20 years ago, that stopped. And the experience then changed to being, once you installed the game, put the CD in, typed the code in, and launched the game, that's when it started. So these old games, there's much more to them than what modern games is. It's more about what's in the box, the experience there. So I know you love your box games too, Neil. So now you're hearing about this, what are you thinking about replicas?
Yeah, and hopefully, while you've been talking about that, Duncan will have put up the pictures of what he described as the jewel in his crown, his collection, and those who are watching on video would see. Can you just? I don't know if you've got that picture in front of you, Dave. Can you just bring it up and describe to those on audio what's on the picture there? So the jewel in the crown in this guy's collection, his centerpiece, his ultimate big box games that he's now found out are all fake. Can you just describe that?
Yeah. So it's an image of Ultima in a plastic bag that you use to put food in. Ultima escaped from Mount Drash. Beyond adventure lies Akalabeth, the world of doom.
Calabeth is a really interesting one because, as you say, that was made originally on Richard Garrett's kitchen table. His mum made the artwork. It was photocopied, hand sort of cut, put in the Ziploc bags. Probably quite easy to fake, to be honest. It depends to what degree these people have gone to work out that they're fakes. You know, how have they dated it?
Yeah, so
it's really interesting.
You're right. In a way, it's easy to fake because there's nothing to say what these exactly have to look like that way. But they've picked up that some of them are fakes. Some of the ways they picked up the fakes, there's scanning artifacts. There's little hazes you would get from where you've scanned something. You would see clues that it's been done that way. The fakes aren't perfect. When I've read through this, I'm fairly sure that if you set your mind to it and you really, really wanted to fake something, you could do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, these things aren't. That's not the same as a manufactured game that's made in a factory. These are all, to some extent, handmade.
Yeah. And it was gutting when I saw that picture, because when I first saw that picture, before I'd read the caption or the story at all, it was just like, wow, those are my dream games. Those are the dream big box collectors games. And for someone to have parted with, I'm sure, a huge amount of money for them, and then to find out they're all fake, it must be absolutely gutting. So my heart goes out to this guy. There are replicas, and then there are, as you described, forgeries, defrauding of innocent people, in people buying these things in good faith. It's an absolutely appalling story, and I hope they keep digging, and I hope they manage to get to some kind of conclusion, and there's some kind of consequences for the guy who's done this, and he just doesn't disappear into the ether, doesn't go through a moon gate to the other side, never to be seen. In terms of replicas, there's nothing wrong with replicas where it's clear what they are. Replicas, a huge amount of enjoyment, as you've described, can be had out of the next best thing to the original. It's what the Mega Drive Mini is to a degree. For many people, that's the next best thing. It's what a football shirt is when you've got Ronaldo on your back and you're running around the park. But that's not Ronaldo's shirt. And, you're happy to pay 50 quid and not, £5,000 for that shirt. And it makes you feel good because you know what it is. But yeah, this story seems to go deep, really deep. It's not an opportunist scam. It sounds like it's someone who's built up a reputation in the Ultimate and the big box community. It sounds like they've manipulated people over a long period of time and indeed played each other off against one another. Sworn them to secrecy, told them one's getting a favor and the other one shouldn't find out. It's pure manipulation. It sounds horrible. Have you got more details, Dave? Can you help us to make a more, because you're obviously very confident you've named this guy in your opening paragraph, so you're not worried about any kind of comeback on that. There's enough evidence out there for this.
It's absolutely beyond question. These are fakes, and all I can say is that the people in this group say that the fakes have come from this guy. That's all I can say. Now, I work in finance, so I keep up to date with how scams work and what the latest scams are and how people do it. And almost all of the scams that we have are done through some level of social engineering, time pressure, or secrets. It's what you've described. And that's how this was done. This was a really well-respected member of the community. And I should say it's not a community that I'm really in. I don't want to pass myself off as having more knowledge than I really do. I'm not in these circles. Now, he did it by telling people stories. For example, the copy of the game he had was a gift, and it shouldn't be revealed that it's been sold on. Keep it quiet. There are games that you can't buy at all. You certainly can't buy them easily. These games don't come up on eBay, and if they do, it's probably a fake. I've listened to a few podcasts talking about the number of Akala Beths going around, that there's far more going around now than there ever were back in the day, because there's so many fakes going around. And you can't, like you said, because it's a handmade game, a homemade game, you can't really prove it's a fake or not easily. So you can't really buy these games. So this is someone saying, here's your opportunity to buy the game. Put time pressure on you to buy it now. It's a secret. Here's your one-off chance, and then people will spend money perhaps that they don't have or they shouldn't be spending on this to buy these games, because they feel the fear of missing out, the old FOMO that I'm a victim of quite often on eBay. That's why I think they bought them. I've seen screenshots of the guy here exposing fakes and scammers on auction sites. So John and Brenda Romero visited the guy to see his big box collection when they were over in Italy. Now the group believe they've identified at least 100,000 euros of sales, and that's a huge amount. I mean, the stuff I've got here, perhaps the stuff I've got here is worth, it must be worth four figures, but nothing like that. Huge amount of sales. And it does sound like a credible figure. And that's only with the people in their spheres. So presumably he'll have sold stuff to people who aren't in those spheres, who haven't been talking to him about the stuff they bought from him, so that it could be even higher. As to the quality of them, the evidence provided shows that they're fakes. Some of the discs are even blank. So a blank disc, I mean, that's a big giveaway there. And you might think, well, that's that obvious, but people would have no reason to believe they're a fake. There's no reason to look. You wouldn't be getting a magnifying glass out to look and see if you can see the evidence of where it's been scanned and reprinted. So I'm pretty sure I would have been taken in too. I mean, it's the nature of how this is done. This isn't people buying it from someone they don't know on eBay. This is people buying it from an expert in the hobby. So the evidence they've got is compelling. These definitely are fakes. It's sad, and it's the human cost in this that's really bad. As I said, people will spend large amounts of money, and perhaps money they shouldn't really have spent. I mean, if there's something for your collection you're offered and you're told this is the chance to get it, you're not going to get another chance. You're going to spend the money that you perhaps don't have, stick it on a credit card just to add to that collection because you think it's going to go up in price. I'm not going to get another chance.
Yeah, something that pops out for me here, Dave, is, of course, the way you've described, we cannot blame the victim for this. They've been taken in by, somebody very elaborately, but also factor into that the grading of the game. So where does that come into the story?
So, one of the games has been graded by, as far as I can determine, has been graded by the VGA, the Video Games Authority, and then by WATA. And WATA are a topic this podcast discussed before, but not by me. Chris, what do you think about grading and WATA in general?
Well, Dave, I think I'm kind of fortunate because I don't tend to buy at the high end of the market. But I mean, this whole story, okay, it's only one game. Let's see it for what it is. It's only one game that they've allegedly graded from this, games.
Do we know which game it is that they graded?
Was it an Ultima?
It's a box copy of Ultima.
Yeah,
it was the Ultima. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it does bring into question their grading, I guess. And I'm just going to say that loosely because it's not an area I'm an expert in. But you would want to think that they are equipped to spot a fake if there's any credibility in their grading. I'm a gamer. I'm not a collector, so I don't have any personal interest in WATA or grading as a thing. I have an unused game for the Jag. The one extra game I bought for my Jag is in fact unused. It's in its original bag inside the box. Everything in the box looks untouched, and there's still the sticky tape sealing that bag. It will get opened. I'm going to play it. That's its purpose, is to be played. So I'm really not into this collecting these, these high-priced items for a shelf. And that's not to bring down people that are, because it's a different hobby. In my mind, it's a different side to the hobby. But I do find this entire story deeply troubling. More so that it was a moderator on this group. I find that quite upsetting. And, even at the low end, it's something I've been paranoid about when I started getting into collecting. Is this an original copy of the game I'm buying? Have they even, the more I learnt about restoration methods, is this the original platter? If they have replaced the platter inside the disc, that's not a problem for me. But have they replaced it with a double density instead of an high density? Those kind of things. But let's face it, I'm gambling with maybe £10, maybe £30. I'm not gambling with hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So I really don't mind losing that money. And do you know what? If I don't know, then I don't care. It's a completely different ball game what you're talking about here. So I think this whole thing is possibly in the hands of the law now, or is that right?
I think that's implied, but they've been quite careful not to say very much on it for, I think, wise reasons. They've not said too much on it. Now, as for the WATA thing, the whole point of them is so that you've got certainty that what you've got is real. If I was to, for some reason, have enough money to buy a copy of a Calabeth or something like that, then I would want to be either certain that it was a replica and clearly marked as a replica, because if I wanted to play that game, I'd be okay to use a replica. But especially after hearing all this stuff, I would want it to be not just marked as a replica, but so that no one could mistake it for the real thing. But if it was real, I would want to know it was real. I'd want proof it was real. And sadly, the guy involved here would be one of the people you would ask if it's real. So I did contact WATA and I asked for their comments on it. And because of the way that this podcast works, there was time, because the story came out just after we recorded last week. So I asked them and they were kind enough to give me a timely response. I was promised contact by Dennis Kahn, who's the president, but instead I was contacted by a media strategist from a PR agency called Golden, who provided a statement, and it was to be attributed to an unnamed spokesperson at WATA. We take claims around our authentication standards seriously and are looking into this matter about one game that was graded several years ago. We are confident in our current authentication process and have reached out to the owner of the game so that we can receive and reevaluate it given newly surfaced information. We are prepared to remedy the situation with the owner if needed. Now, I can't really fault that. What they're saying is we made a mistake in the past and we're going to sort it, and we're not going to do that now. And we're prepared to remedy the situation with the owner if needed.
Hang on. They're saying we're prepared to receive it and reevaluate the game that we now know is a fake, so we can tell you it's a fake.
That doesn't work.
Well,
it doesn't work.
They want. Well, I'm guessing they want to look at it and say, "Okay, we've no way out of this. It is a fake." But from what it sounds like there, I mean, how could they have told it was a real one? Because the only way they could have told it a real one would be to compare it against something that's known to be a real one, and that's an expensive process, and they haven't bothered doing that.
There is another way. I mean, surely they would have charged a lot of money for this process. Yes. I don't know how the payment system works with WATA, but I would imagine, if you're having a very expensive diamond evaluated by a specialist, you'd pay more than if it was just, something from Elizabeth Duke. So given the amount of money that's probably changing hands for this assessment, perhaps they could have tried to get hold of Richard Garriott, who is responsive and quite chatty.
That's the level of what you need to do this. You need to do something like that. But what have they actually done? Have they just looked online and gone, "Yeah, it looks like it to me"?
Looks about right.
Yeah.
Opened the box, giving it a sniff. Yeah, that smells old.
Doesn't smell good at all. That's fine. Now, there have the big box collectors have issued some statements, and they've issued, which I'll ask our producer Duncan to link it here, a guide on what to do to try and avoid picking up something that you don't think is real, or you're concerned may not be real. And this story tells you to always be to be aware of it, because it may come from a source you trust. And they're keeping a dignified silence on what happens next, which I think is very wise, rather than going off on things that are half-cocked, especially if it goes to legal things. The less they say in public about it, presumably, the better. But my heartfelt sympathy to anyone affected. I'm a minor collector. The stuff I have, there's a few valuable things there, but not very many. I mean, most of the stuff is a $5 or a 10 or 20 quid, 30 quid, that kind of thing. It's not worth someone's effort to fake it.
Yeah, it's another example, isn't it, of what that there are plenty of examples stacking up of them not quite getting it right, or just overvaluing genuine items as well. It's almost like, because none of these things are one-offs. I know there are a limited number of these things available, some of these games now, but it's not like you're assessing something from Egyptian periods that you only have one example of. There are others. So it's almost like we need a central archive of games, like an official central archive of games where things can be compared, and we know they're the authentic ones. Perhaps Garrett himself has loaned his collection, and you've got them all there. And then that would give me confidence in a grading service like that, if they could go and compare it. But you just get the impression these things are passing over someone's desk. Like you say, they're doing a quick Google search. I'd love to know their processes to know exactly how they can be an authority, because I don't have confidence in them as the authority for games grading, and I don't know how they would establish that. Yeah.
How is it that someone like Water didn't spot that this is a fake, whereas the recipient of the game has picked up that it's a fake, and then been able to do further digging to establish the fact that there are other fakes out there?
There's loads of there seems to be loads of fakes out there, a lot of them, but nobody spotted it because nobody looked. But that's Wata's job to look. That's what you pay them to do. You pay them to do, I guess, to do the two things. One is to make sure that this is the real thing by looking at what a real thing is. But on the other side of that, they should be looking at to say, what markers do we have to show that this is a reproduction? To show that someone has printed off a JPEG, to show that someone a JPEG, show that someone has a GIF or a GIF, a ping or a ping, to show that someone has gone through the steps to reproduce this. Do you see, when you scan something that's black and white on a photocopier, you might see a little bit of red come in there, a little bit around the characters and so on. Have they sat down and looked for that? Because if you look at it, at the evidence that's been provided, even if you've never seen a copy of Mount Drash or you've never seen a copy of Ultima 4, there are things in this that you could show, well, hang on a minute, this isn't quite right.
Yeah. So I guess the question I'm raising is, is Wata made up of people that are into games, or is it made up of people that are qualified in forensic investigation for this kind of work? Do you know what I mean? Because it's two different things. So if this is just a group of people that are into games and think they can spot, this is a good copy of a game, this is a fantastic mint-looking Super Mario for the NES, well, that's completely different to actually looking at paperwork, at cardboard, at the quality of cardboard. Is it the right print material? Is it the right font? Like you say, are there evidence that this is scanned and reprinted? That's a completely different skill set. So I assume, I haven't looked at Wata's website, but are there criteria of the staff that they employ and their areas of expertise? If you're going to be throwing big money at them, maybe that's the kind of thing to look into. I don't know.
I think we should put out an appeal to anyone listening who has perhaps worked at or is working at Wata. You can keep your anonymity if you want to. Tell us the stories from the inside, because if we don't hear from you, Chris, we're going to have to make you our man on the inside. We're going to have to infiltrate. We'll get you in there.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so it's have a look at the the documents I'll ask to Duncan to look at, and you can see what the evidence is. They've been really, really thorough and really careful about explaining it, so that if you do sit down and take the time to look at it, you'll understand that it's beyond any question that these are not real. And also, they'll give you some tips on how to avoid it happening to yourself.
On now to our community question of the week. And last week we asked you the question. We want to know, in terms of productivity software, which product did you find it the hardest to let go of? Any platform, any genre of software, whether spreadsheet, art package, or music maker. Did you cling on to it till the end? Fingernails, deeply dug into that productivity package. And do you still cling on to them now? Tell us your stories. We'll go into our first answer, which comes from Piston Retro. Yeah.
Pitstone Retro.
Pitstone, yeah.
Pitstone. Sorry,
Pitstone.
I've completely misread that. It's not Piston, it's Pitstone Retro.
It's
Sorry about
Freudian.
It's fine.
that. Here we go. So they say Paint Shop Pro on the PC. I started using the shareware version of PSP in the mid-90s after finding it on a cover disc. It was easy to use, but had some advanced features at the time, like the clone brush. It was much more useful than Microsoft's Paintbrush, but easier to use than Photoshop. I used it up to version 7. After that, they changed the interface, so I stuck at 7. Later, Corel came along and messed it up some more. I would still use it today, but it has a memory leak on modern operating systems, so only get 10 minutes of use before it crashes. That's unfortunate. But yeah, I do remember that period where Paint Shop Pro pretty much became the de facto paint package for most of us. Certainly on the PC platform, because Adobe had a bit more dominance over on the Macintosh. But Paint Shop Pro, probably first discovered it myself on a cover disc as well. Did you guys use it?
Never used it.
I'm thinking back to when I visited the cave recently, and Stu Cambridge gave us the talk on what he used. Is this not the kind of thing that he was talking about, where he used ones that we hadn't heard of that were alternatives that continued on a different legacy?
Well, he's a Linux guy, so he was using open source paint packages and making a donation to them. I don't know if any of them had their heritage back to this. Paint Shop Pro was a paid-for product, but there was a shareware version available for it. I don't know. There may be some heritage in it that goes through to modern things. Sounds like, Corel bought them, as Pitstone Retro describes. Had to double-check the name there again.
So did it become Corel Draw? Because I remember Corel Draw.
Well, Corel Draw existed alongside it, I think, and that was a vector package, wasn't it?
Oh, okay. Right. That's the difference, right?
Yeah. Dave's up and he's picking something off the shelf. So what's he going to show us?
Copy of Corel Draw.
The only paint packages you need.
I can't make out what they are. Oh,
No.
Hyperdraw.
Hyperpaint and Hyperdraw.
Oh. Are they
Moving on.
That's not true. Other paint packages exist.
Chris, do you want to read the next one out?
Yeah, no worries. This is from, I think, hang on. I've lost my place. Sorry.
It's from ProTech 438 is the next
ProTech
answer.
438. So for me, Deluxe Paint 2. Oh, nice. Enhanced is the productivity software that probably has held resistance on my hard drive for the longest. Residence. Sorry.
Put your hand up when you get to a big
Sorry,
word.
I did. Look, it was a day off here, right? It was a day off here. So
Are you a
maybe
console
I
gamer?
had been on the wine before we recorded as well. So I've just got to the end of that. And so we shall press on. We're nearly at the end. So it's held residence on my hard drive for the longest, seeing various versions of DOS and Windows to come and go. Starting from the early 90s, I believe I had it installed well into the 2000s. Wow. Although I didn't actively use it. The user interface in DP2 was extremely intuitive compared to, for example, Photoshop or GIMP. It wasn't until 2016 when I found a spiritual successor to Deluxe Paint, the Paint Tool SAI. Its user interface is very similar to DPaint whilst adding new features to it. It's also very lightweight compared to Photoshop or Clip Studio, even though I have also Clip Studio, which is extremely feature-rich. I find myself returning to SAI just due to its intuitiveness. It would be fun to give Deluxe Paint yet another go and see if it's possible to use a pen display with it. That would be interesting, actually. DPaint for me is an Amiga title, 100%. Yeah. But when you get into PC, Deluxe Paint feels like MS Paint, I'm sorry to say, and Photoshop is infinitely better. So, yeah, from a nostalgia point of view, I'm with you there, mate. But from a feature-rich point of view, Gotta disagree.
But why D-Paint 2? People usually hold up D-Paint 3 as the perfect one, and D-Paint 4 goes into the AGA features a bit more and is a bit slow on a OCS ECS machine. So D-Paint 3 is usually held up. So interesting talking about D-Paint 2, and also on the PC. So he was using that on a PC, not your typical Amiga D-Paint 3 user. So yeah, interesting. And just going back to what Dave raised about Stu Cambridge, one of the big things that Stu raised about D-Paint and moving on to other paint packages is what attracted him to the other paint packages were those that carried on using the keyboard shortcuts that first appeared in D-Paint 3. So he could carry on just with one hand on the keyboard. But I have to say, that's exactly how I learned to use Photoshop and all of the Adobe packages. You've always got one hand on the left side of the keyboard and one hand on the mouse, and you're always flicking between all of those shortcuts. But yeah.
Our final answer this week is from Fiskit, who I've seen that name before, so he must have. Was he not on last week's?
Yes,
answers?
he was.
I'm still using Personal Paint, which he says is from an Amiga format CD, on the Amiga to make graphics for my game projects. Not found anything better yet. I don't know if that means if he's not found anything better because he's using Amiga and he has to use Amiga software, or whether it means he's not found anything better in the whole realm of even modern computers.
Yeah. Well, that brings us full circle all the way back to what we opened the show with, which was 10-Minute Amiga's retro podcast, which is the Amiga paint competition. So go and check the links in the show notes.
Yeah, I would suggest it's a good thing to do, because trying to do a project now in Photoshop, I mean, the sky's the limit. But if you do something on one of these old Amiga things, at least you've got a limited thing. You can you don't then have to do a massive project. You can do something nice and simple. And I haven't watched the entries into, I mean, art isn't really my thing, but if you haven't watched the entries into this competition before, it's amazing what people can do. And you're not talking about putting days into this, a few hours, and you can do something.
So on now to this week's question of the week, community question of the week, which you can participate in at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, where you can also submit stories for us to consider and upvote other stories for us to consider for inclusion in the show. And this week's question of the week is Chris.
So thank you, Neil. Yes, the question of the week, because of course we have one ready to go, is basically what show or movie or TV series, whatever, transports you back to the 80s and 90s in a really good way. It could be to do with computers, could be to do with the toys that they show, the fashions that they have. What really takes you back to a place that you are and a time that you have fond memories of, and how does it do it? Just let us know in the subreddit. Or something like that.
As always, thank you very much to everyone for listening. We were described last week, I think it was on Twitter, by someone as like the modern equivalent of a Saturday morning kids TV show. So
that's Hoffman.
I like that.
Your mate.
I like that. So hopefully you're enjoying your breakfast as you listen to us today. And do participate in the subreddit, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
He's waving.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 AGIMA, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.